Welcome to Sleepy Stories. Tonight, we are going to journey through a few stories based on the works of Hans Christian Andersen. Let's take a moment and settle in. Get comfortable. Take a slow, easy breath in through your nose and out through your mouth. You've arrived in a quiet space, a place made just for you, a place where time slows down, where stories become soft light, and where every breath draws you closer to calm. Let your body begin to settle and allow yourself the peace to soften. Loosen your jaw. Let your shoulders fall away from your ears. You don't need to hold anything right now. If you're lying down, feel the weight of the blanket over you, how it anchors you gently to the earth. If you're sitting, notice how the chair supports you, how the air rests cool against your skin. With each breath, release a little more. Breathe in comfort and breathe out the day. The world outside can wait. There's nowhere to go, nothing to fix, only this soft moment and the quiet sound of your own steady breathing. As you listen, you might notice your thoughts beginning to drift, like leaves floating on water, slowly moving out of sight. You don't need to chase them, just let them go. Now let your eyes grow heavy, your hands warm, your breath smooth and slow. You are safe here, you are seen, you are allowed to rest. And as the story begins, you can simply listen, allowing every word to carry you deeper, into comfort, into stillness, into sleep. Perhaps you remember this story of a small girl, a handful of matches, and the soft light they bring to the darkest night. But tonight, let's retell it in a gentler way, a story not of loss, but of light. A story about the warmth we carry with us, even when the world feels cold. If you haven't already, settle into comfort. Let the rhythm of your breath slow. And together, let's wander into the quiet glow of the little match girl. The city slept beneath a veil of snow. It was the last evening of the old year. Calm, cold, and silver with frost. Snowflakes fell in slow spirals, settling softly on rooftops and window ledges, gathering in the cobblestones until the world seemed made of quiet light. Down a narrow street where lamplight trembled in the chill air, a little girl walked alone. She wore a thin coat that had once been her mother's, the sleeves turned up so they wouldn't trail the ground. Her shoes were gone, one lost, one taken, and her feet were bare against the snow, red and pale as porcelain. In her hands she carried a bundle of matches. Her fingers trembled around them, more from carefulness than cold. She wasn't thinking of the coins she might earn. She was thinking of the light. How each match, when struck, flared like a promise. Warm, golden, alive. The streets were quiet now. Families had gathered indoors, their windows glowing with supper light. From one home came the sound of laughter, from another the faint hum of a hymn. The little girl paused, listening, smiling softly though no one saw. She found a place to rest, the corner of two tall buildings where the wind curled but did not bite. Snow gathered on her hair like a crown of pearls. She curled her toes beneath her and opened her small hands. So many matches, so many tiny suns. She took one and held it close. For a moment she only looked at it, tracing the wooden stem, feeling the grain. Then, with a breath, she struck it against the wall. A spark, a whisper, and then flame. Golden and trembling, the light grew in her eyes until the world around her seemed to fade. The snow became soft velvet. The wall before her turned to glass. Through it she saw warmth, a hearth glowing in a wide room, with candles flickering and bread rising on the fire. She smiled, not from hunger, but from wonder. The match burned low, then vanished, leaving only the echo of light behind her eyelids. But she didn't feel the cold return right away. The warmth lingered, like a memory that would not quite fade. She lit another and another. Each small flame shimmered into something more. Not illusions, but memories. The soft rhythm of her mother's hands brushing her hair, the sound of stories told by candlelight, the smell of oranges in winter. She felt not alone, but surrounded by everything she had loved and everything that had loved her in return. The world beyond the light felt far away, distant, gentle, and fading into sleep. She leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes, the glow still warm on her skin. Outside, snow continued to fall, but to her, it felt like light descending from the sky, tiny stars returning home, and somewhere, above the hush of the street, a bell began to ring. Not sharp, but soft, the kind of sound that feels less like music and more like comfort. She opened her eyes once more. The matches still glowed faintly in her lap, their warmth now calm and steady. The night was no longer cold, only quiet, and the world, for one small moment, felt entirely at peace. She smiled, her breath misting softly in the air. And in that quiet corner of the sleeping city, the last evening of the year became something bright, something endless. Snow whispered down in silken waves, turning the streets into rivers of silver. The girl sat quietly in her corner, hands cupped around the last hint of warmth from her match. The flame had faded, but its echo still shimmered in her heart, a gentle reminder that light, once seen, does not easily disappear. For a long moment, she simply breathed. The world around her moved slower now, as though winter itself were holding its breath. Even the falling snow seemed to float a little more softly, unwilling to disturb her. She looked at her bundle again, the little sticks of wood tied neatly with a bit of string. Each one was waiting, patient and full of promise. And she thought perhaps there was still light left to see. She struck another. The flame bloomed gently, not sharp or sudden, but graceful, a soft wave of gold against the cool air. This time she didn't see a wall or the cobblestones beneath her. She saw a room bathed in candlelight, its walls lined with garlands of pine. In the centre stood a table, not a feast of kings, but a simple supper laid out with care. There was bread, still warm, a bowl of soup steaming gently, a candle whose wick trembled but did not fall, and beyond it she could see her grandmother, not as she had been in her last days, but younger, her face kind and soft. Her hands moved slowly, folding napkins, brushing crumbs from the table. She looked up and her eyes met the girl's. "Come closer," she seemed to say, though no words passed between them. And so the girl did, in her mind, in her heart. For a moment, she could almost feel those familiar hands smoothing her hair, the warmth of presence that no fire could match. Then, as before, the flame fluttered, faded, and the image melted into darkness once more. But she did not feel sadness, only calm, as though some small piece of her heart had been gently returned. The next match caught easily, as if eager to burn. This flame was brighter, golden, with a hint of blue at its heart. within it she saw the outline of a garden. There were lanterns swaying among the branches, their lights like captured stars. Flowers bloomed out of season, roses, tulips, soft wild violets. A little stream wound through the scene, and its surface reflected the sky, not winter grey, but a kind of dawn. She stepped barefoot across the grass, yet her feet did not ache. She felt the cool earth beneath her as comfort, not cold, and she listened to the low hum of the bees asleep in the blossoms, to the rhythm of life that did not end, but simply changed. For a long while she stayed there within the warmth of that light. The city around her disappeared completely. There was no hunger, no frost, only stillness, like the quiet heart of a song. When the match burned low, she let it go. She didn't need to hold it. The light had already entered her, gentle, steady, unafraid. She leaned her head back against the wall once more. Snowflakes landed in her hair like tiny lamps, soft and glowing. She smiled at the thought that perhaps even the snow carried a kind of warmth, not of heat, but of peace. And above, through the calm air, she could see the faintest shimmer of stars. They looked like distant flames, endless and patient, flickering not for show but for comfort. One match, one light, and now a little more of the world felt alive. The night deepened, but she did not notice the passing of hours. Each flame became part of a larger light, woven together like threads of gold through the fabric of darkness. It was not a dream. It was not imagination. It was remembrance and return. As she closed her eyes, she whispered, not to anyone near, but to the air, "Light doesn't end." And somewhere, though she could not see it, another star kindled in the sky. The city was silent now. The snow had thickened into a soft blanket, hiding the cobblestones and smoothing the edges of the world. Even the bells had quieted, leaving only the faint hum of winter wind moving between the houses. The girl sat very still, her head resting against the wall, her small bundle of matches glowing faintly beside her. She had one left, a single slender stick of light. She turned it over in her hands, smiling at its smallness. It was not pity that filled her, nor fear, only tenderness, for this little flame had become something more than warmth. It was the thread that connected her to everything she had ever loved. She looked toward the sky. Snow drifted past the lamplight in slow spirals. Each flake glowed as if it carried its own secret fire. And she thought perhaps every bit of light in the world was part of one great glow. The hearths, the stars, the candles, even her matches, all connected, all remembering each other. She smiled, struck the final match and whispered, "Just one more." The flame rose gently, calm and blue at the centre, and for the first time it did not flicker. It held steady, wide and luminous. She saw her grandmother again, standing in the golden glow, her arms open. Behind her was the garden, the same one the girl had glimpsed before, now brighter, blooming as if the sun had never set. There were voices too, laughter soft as wind through leaves, the sound of rivers moving over stone, the low hum of life that never ends. The girl stood. Her feet didn't touch the ground, but she didn't feel afraid. She reached toward the light and it reached back. The flame did not burn out. It widened, quietly, endlessly, until the wall behind her, the street, The snow all dissolved into gold, and then there was only peace. When morning came, the city stirred awake. The first rays of dawn touched the rooftops, and the world seemed washed clean. A few passers-by noticed the little figure by the wall, her expression calm, her hands still gently cupping what remained of the matches. They did not see sadness, only serenity, as though she had simply followed the light to wherever it led. Above her, a thin stream of morning sun pierced the clouds, warm and soft. And for those who passed that day, something quiet stirred inside, a reminder they couldn't quite name. The baker left a loaf at the corner. A child paused, watching the sky. A woman, closing her shutters, whispered a prayer she hadn't spoken in years. The light, it seemed, had not gone out at all. It had spread. That night, when the snow fell again, it glimmered a little differently, not cold, not distant. Every flake carried a small golden warmth, as if the world remembered. And when lamps were lit in windows across the city, their glow felt just a touch softer. Some said it was only imagination, but those who stood quietly enough could feel it. That hush, that shimmer, the tender echo of a child's flame, still moving gently through the world. And so, the little match burned low, and the winter night faded into calm. The light she left behind still drifts quietly through the world, in candles, in hearths, in the gentle shimmer of snow. But the night does not end here. We follow that same light to another place, not a city, but a quiet pond at the edge of spring. Here the air smells of reeds and rain, and the water reflects a soft morning sky. This is the story of the Ugly Duckling, a tale about growing slowly into who we are meant to be, and learning that gentleness and grace often arrive in their own time. So settle a little deeper, let your breath match the rhythm of the rippling water, and drift with me into the calm of this next story. It was early summer, the kind of morning when the world feels newly washed. Mist drifted over the pond like soft silk, and the rushes swayed with the slow sigh of the breeze. In a small nest among the reeds, a mother duck sat patiently on her eggs. She had been there for many days, warming, waiting, humming softly to herself. All around her, the pond stirred with quiet life. Frogs croaked sleepily, fish broke the surface with tiny ripples, and somewhere far off, a heron called through the fog. One by one, the eggs began to crack. Soft cheeping filled the air. Tiny bills peeked through the shells, and soon 5 little ducklings blinked up at the morning light, their feathers like golden down. The mother duck quacked happily, but then she noticed something strange. One egg remained unbroken. It was larger than the rest, smooth and pale. She nudged it gently, listening. No sound. Still, she waited. Days passed. The reeds whispered with summer wind, and dragonflies floated lazily above the water. At last, on a quiet afternoon, the large egg began to tremble. A faint crack appeared, widening slowly until the shell broke apart. Out tumbled a duckling, larger, greyer, softer than the others. He blinked against the light, awkward but calm, his feathers silvery and damp. The mother duck tilted her head. "Well," she said kindly, "you took your time," and she gathered him beneath her wing. The next morning she led her children to the pond. The water shimmered, reflecting the pale gold of dawn. One by one, the ducklings slipped into the water, paddling with clumsy joy. Even the grey one, slower, quieter, followed with care. The water welcomed him as if it had been waiting. When they returned to the shore, the other ducklings laughed and played, tumbling over each other in the grass. The grey duckling smiled too, though his heart felt different, not sad, just curious. He looked at his reflection in the pond and saw feathers that weren't yellow or golden, but soft grey like clouds before rain. He wondered why. He wondered if someday he might match the others. The mother duck watched him and spoke gently. "Do not worry, little one," she said. "Every feather knows what it's meant to be." And she brushed a wing over his head until his eyes drifted, half closed. The sun climbed higher, the reeds swayed, and in that warm stillness all 6 ducklings fell asleep beside the pond, the smallest one dreaming of skies wide enough for everyone. Days passed and summer deepened. The pond grew full and warm, its edges lined with reeds that whispered softly whenever the wind came by. The ducklings were growing too, brighter, bolder, more playful. The youngest, the grey one, tried his best to keep up. He paddled along beside them, his small ripples spreading quietly across the water. He was kind and gentle and curious about everything: the sky, the minnows, the glimmering patterns that light made on the pond's surface. But sometimes, when he tried to join their games, the others laughed. They didn't mean to be cruel. They were simply small and didn't yet know that difference could be beautiful. "Look at you," one of them would tease. "Your feathers aren't bright like ours." Another would splash and say, "You're too big for a duckling. You'll sink the pond." The little one smiled and tried to laugh too, though his chest felt tight. He wasn't angry, just quiet. He would glide away to the far edge of the pond, where the lily pads floated and the frogs croaked softly, and he'd watch the clouds drift by, wondering why he felt apart even when surrounded by others. One morning, the wind changed. It carried the scent of autumn, crisp leaves and cool earth. The mother duck gathered her brood and said, "Stay near the water now. The world grows colder when the reeds turn gold." But the grey duckling found his gaze following a group of birds flying overhead. They were large and graceful, their necks long, their wings steady against the wind. They flew in a great V-shaped line, calling softly to one another. He didn't know what kind of birds they were, but something inside him stirred at the sight, a quiet, yearning ache, not of sadness, but of recognition. He stayed by the pond until dusk, watching the sky long after the others had gone to rest. As the nights grew cooler, the teasing of the other ducklings sharpened. They didn't understand why he was different, and sometimes when he tried to play, they would turn away. Even the frogs, friendly and green, would fall silent when he passed. So one evening, as the sun dipped behind the willows, he made a choice. He looked once more at his sleeping family, the reeds swaying gently around them, and whispered, "Maybe the world is wide enough for me to find where I belong." He stepped into the water. The pond was calm, silver with moonlight. He paddled quietly across, his reflection gliding beside him like a companion. When he reached the far bank, he turned once, softly quacked goodbye, and disappeared into the tall grass. The world beyond the pond was vast, Fields stretched in golden waves beneath the setting sun. A river wound through the meadows, whispering softly to itself. And though the little duckling had never been this far from home, he did not feel afraid. The air smelled new, cool, and alive. He met a group of swallows resting on a fence. They chirped to him kindly, asking where he was headed. "I don't know," he said honestly. "I'm just walking until I find a place that feels like home." The swallows nodded, and one said, "Then follow the wind. It's a good guide." And so he did. Night came quietly. Stars shimmered above like tiny lamps, and the grass glistened with dew. The little duckling found a spot beneath a hedge and curled his feet beneath him. He was tired, but peaceful. As he closed his eyes, he thought about the pond, the warmth of his mother's feathers, the laughter of his brothers and sisters, even their teasing. He missed it all, yet he felt something new too, a soft kind of courage, like a small flame in his chest. The world was wide, yes, but maybe it was kind too. The crickets began to sing. The river murmured nearby, and the stars above seemed to blink in rhythm with his slowing breath. And as he drifted into sleep, the grey duckling dreamed of flying, not high, not fast, but peacefully, his wings steady beneath the moon. The days grew shorter, and the sun's warmth softened to gold. Leaves turned from green to amber, then drifted one by one to the earth below. The little duckling wandered quietly through fields and hedgerows, following the gentle rhythm of the seasons' change. He had grown taller now, his feathers longer and paler, soft grey that shimmered faintly when touched by morning light. The world around him had become a quilt of colour: brown branches, silver mist, quiet streams lined with frost. Though he was often alone, the solitude felt less lonely now, more like a long, deep breath. He found comfort in small things: the rustle of dry grass, the sound of a brook beneath a thin layer of ice, the way the stars appeared earlier each evening. Each night, as he tucked his head beneath his wing, he whispered to himself, "The world is wide, and I am part of it." It became a kind of prayer, soft and steady. One evening, as the first snow fell, the duckling came upon a small cottage at the edge of the woods. Light glowed warmly from the window. He peered inside and saw a woman stirring soup, a cat curled near the hearth, and a hen perched on the edge of a wooden chair. The woman spotted him through the window. "Oh, you poor thing," she said, and opened the door. "Come in before you freeze." The warmth startled him. He had never known such still air, such softness beneath his feet. He tucked himself near the hearth, sighing into the heat. The cat eyed him with suspicion. The hen clucked and fluffed her feathers, but the woman smiled kindly and placed a little bowl of grain beside him. "You can stay here until the cold passes," she said, and for a time he did. The cottage was small but peaceful. Snow fell thick outside, and the wind hummed through the chimney like a song. The woman hummed too as she worked, old tunes that reminded the duckling of ripples on the pond. He liked the sound. It reminded him that warmth could be quiet. Still, he sometimes looked toward the window where the snow pressed softly against the glass. He missed the open air, the feel of wind under his feathers. When he told this to the cat simply yawned. "When it's warm and full inside, why dream of the cold?" The hen nodded in agreement, but the duckling only smiled. He didn't know how to explain it, that he loved warmth but needed space too. So one morning, when the snowlight was silver and the air gentle, he slipped out through the half-open door. He whispered a thank you to the cottage and waddled into the white. Winter deepened. Days blurred into one another. White sky, white fields, white dreams. The pond he once knew was far away, but sometimes when he found a small patch of unfrozen water, he would slip in and float, remembering. The cold bit at his feathers, but he stayed. The water felt honest, alive. When food was scarce, he tucked himself among the reeds. When wind howled, he bent low and waited for stillness. And when stars came out, he looked up and whispered, "Someday I'll know where I belong." The world was hard at times, but never unkind. It was teaching him the quiet strength of enduring, not with fear, but with faith. One night, as the snow finally began to melt, he woke to the sound of something he hadn't heard in months, dripping water, soft and rhythmic. He lifted his head. The ice was loosening. The world was changing again. He stepped from his nest of reeds and stretched his wings. They were broader now, strong beneath his down. When he moved them, they caught the air differently. Not awkward, but graceful. The wind seemed to recognize him, and for the first time he felt the season turning not only around him, but within him. He didn't know what waited ahead, but he knew he would follow the light of spring wherever it led. The moon rose above the river, pale and full. He looked up at it, calm and ready, and as he drifted to sleep beneath its glow, the first geese of the season passed overhead, calling softly as if inviting him home. Morning came soft and silver, carrying with it the first breath of spring. The frost on the riverbank glistened in the early light, and the air smelled faintly of rain. Tiny shoots of green pushed through the thawing earth, and somewhere nearby a thrush began to sing. The duckling, taller now, strong yet serene, opened his eyes. He had survived the long winter, each quiet night shaping him into something steadier. The cold had taught him stillness, the wind had taught him grace, and the stars had kept him company when the world was white and wide. He stretched his wings. The motion felt different this time, smooth, balanced, effortless. He blinked at their length, their whiteness, though he did not yet understand what he was seeing. Above him the sky stretched clear and blue, and as he lifted his gaze, he saw them again, the great white birds he had once watched in autumn, gliding through the air in elegant formation. They called softly to one another, their wings catching the light like silk. His heart stirred, the same quiet ache as before, but now it felt less like longing and more like recognition. He took a step toward the water's edge, and then, without thinking, he spread his wings and pushed against the air. The first lift startled him, a rush of wind, a shimmer of freedom, but then came calm. His wings found rhythm. He rose, circling once above the river, the earth unfolding below like a waking dream. He flew low, close enough to see his reflection in the water, a shape white and luminous, gliding like light over glass. He barely recognized himself, but he smiled. He landed gently on the far side of the river, where willows trailed their fingers into the current. The other swans floated there, their movements slow and graceful, their eyes kind. They turned toward him but did not startle. One drifted closer, her feathers catching the gold of sunrise. "You've come home," she said, her voice soft as rippling water. He blinked, unsure. "I'm not one of you," he whispered. "I was called ugly once. I don't belong anywhere." The swan only smiled. "Look." He turned toward the river again. The surface rippled once, then stilled, and there, reflected in the morning light, was not the awkward grey duckling he remembered, but a swan, pure and strong and shining softly against the dawn. He watched for a long time, quiet, awed, not proud, not surprised, simply peaceful. The others welcomed him, their wings brushing his as they drifted together down the stream. No one hurried, no one asked who he had been. They simply made space for him, as though he had always been meant to arrive. The world around him bloomed, the trees unfolded their leaves, the water shimmered with sunlight, and in that gentle brightness, he felt something he had never known before. Belonging, unforced and kind. He remembered the pond of his childhood, his mother's soft voice, the laughter of his brothers and sisters. He hoped they were well. He hoped they too had found places where they felt at peace. As the day passed, he rested his head against his wing and watched the sky drift by. The same wind that had once carried him from home now carried him into it. He closed his eyes, hearing only the soft rhythm of water and the quiet whisper of feathers brushing air. And for the first time in his life, he did not wonder who he was. He simply was. The sun set slow and golden, the swans gliding in the reflected fire of evening. Above them, the stars began to appear, one by one, like distant lanterns lighting the way. The young swan lifted his head and watched them, his heart full, his spirit calm. He had been lost and found, cold and warm, alone and finally together. And through it all, the same truth had followed him, that gentleness is not weakness, and that sometimes the slowest growth becomes the most beautiful. He lowered his head once more, his reflection flickering softly beneath the water's glow, and in the stillness of that perfect moment, the world seemed to exhale, peaceful, complete, and endlessly kind. And so, the young swan drifted on calm waters beneath the soft glow of twilight. His heart, once uncertain, now rested in peace. The sky above him deepened into night. Stars reflected like silver petals across the pond. In that stillness, it was easy to imagine that every light upon the water held a dream, each one waiting to rise, to ripple, to become something more. If you listen closely, you can almost hear the water speak. The same water that once carried the swan's reflection now carries the songs of tides and distant waves. It hums softly beneath the moon, a voice that calls from below the surface, gentle, endless, full of longing. And so we follow that song. We drift away from the quiet pond and into a deeper sea, where light moves like silk and coral glows beneath shifting blue. Here begins a story of love, sacrifice, and the search for one's true self beneath the surface of dreams. This is the Little Mermaid, a tale not of sorrow, but of transformation, of a heart that seeks and a spirit that learns that even love, in its softest form, can set us free. Take a slow breath. Let the sound of the waves cradle you, and together let's sink gently into the calm depths of this timeless story. Far below the rolling waves, where sunlight turns to silver ribbons and drifts softly through the water, there lies a kingdom quiet as a dream. Its towers are shaped from coral and pearl, its gardens sway with seaweed that glimmers like silk in the tide. Every current hums a gentle song, and even the smallest shell holds an echo of that melody, the soft, eternal pulse of the ocean itself. In that kingdom lived a young mermaid. The youngest of 6 sisters, she was gentle where the others were bold, curious where they were content. Her hair shimmered like seagrass caught in sunlight, and her eyes reflected the calm, blue-green world around her, while her sisters played among the coral arches or gathered shells for crowns. She loved to sit in the quietest corners of the garden, listening to the hum of the deep, listening to the whisper of waves far above. Her grandmother, the oldest mermaid in the sea, would tell stories as they rested beneath the luminous glow of jellyfish. Stories of the world above, of sky and stars and the strange, warm light called fire. The humans walk on the land, the grandmother would say. They build their homes from stone, and their hearts are full of dreams just as ours are full of song. The young mermaid listened with her whole being. She could almost picture it, air instead of water, feet instead of fins, the soft light of day touching her face. It seemed both impossible and achingly near. Each sister, as tradition allowed, was permitted to visit the surface when she turned 15. One by one they rose to see the sky for the first time, and one by one they returned, their voices hushed, their eyes full of wonder. The eldest spoke of bright ships with white sails that caught the wind like wings. The second described sunsets painted in gold and rose. The third had seen forests, dark and deep, that reached right to the edge of the sea. The fourth spoke of the moonlight, which shimmered on the water like 1,000 pearls. The fifth, quietest of all, whispered only, "The stars, they sound like silence." Each tale filled the youngest sister's heart with longing. She swam higher each day, as far as she dared, until the water grew pale and full of shifting light. Sometimes she would lie on the sandy floor and look upward, imagining the sky as another sea, one she had yet to swim. Her grandmother often found her there and smiled. "Patience, my little wave," she would say. "The surface will wait for you. The world above does not forget those who dream." Time flowed like a current. Seasons changed in the world above, though beneath the sea time was marked only by the rise and fall of tides. The young mermaid grew taller, her hair longer, her voice richer. She sang to the dolphins as they passed, and even the sea plants seemed to sway toward her song. Finally, the day came when she turned 15. The sea itself seemed to shimmer with celebration, schools of fish darting through columns of light, the coral gardens blooming brighter than ever. Her sisters circled her in joy, each presenting a small gift, a pearl, a polished shell, a piece of sea glass worn smooth by years of tide. Her grandmother placed a delicate wreath of white lilies around her hair. "Now, my dear," she said softly, "you may go where your heart has always longed to wander. But remember, the sea will always be your home." The mermaid nodded, her heart fluttering like a small bird. She rose through the cool blue water, higher and higher, until the colour shifted from indigo to pale silver. Tiny bubbles followed her like stars. And then she broke the surface. The air touched her skin like the gentlest kiss. The night was still and clear. Above her spread the vast sky, shimmering with countless points of light, stars, just as her sisters had said. They seemed to watch her, quiet and patient, like old friends. The sea rocked her gently and she floated, gazing at the horizon where water met the heavens. Then, far off, she saw something new, a ship, its lanterns glowing like golden moons. Music drifted across the waves, faint but warm, like laughter carried on wind. She swam closer, careful not to be seen. Human figures moved along the deck, their faces lit by candlelight, and among them stood one who caught her gaze, a young prince, his expression full of joy as he looked toward the sea. She watched him for a long time, the water lapping quietly around her. There was something in his stillness, in the kindness of his smile, that stirred a gentle ache inside her chest, the same ache she had felt when she dreamed of sunlight. The night deepened, the sea grew calm, and the little mermaid, her heart newly awake, floated beneath the stars and whispered to the tide, "So this is the world above." The ship drifted peacefully through the night, its lanterns swaying like captured stars. The little mermaid floated nearby, her eyes fixed on the light and the laughter spilling softly across the waves. Music drifted toward her, low strings, the hum of human voices, the gentle sound of feet moving in time. The prince stood at the rail, watching the sea with a kind of quiet wonder. He smiled at something unseen, perhaps the wind itself, and she felt as though the whole night had been lit by that single expression. She lingered, listening to the ship's wooden timbers creak, to the hush of water folding against the hull. The sea, at first, was calm, but then, somewhere in the distance, the air began to shift. The stars blurred behind a veil of cloud. A low, steady hum rose from beneath the waves, the ocean changing its tune. The little mermaid turned her face to the wind. It carried the scent of rain. A storm was coming. The first flash of lightning rippled across the sky, silent, distant, like a whispered warning. The music aboard the ship faltered. Then came the wind, sharp and sudden, bending the sails and scattering the light from the lanterns into pieces. The sea lifted, rolling in great silver swells. But to the mermaid, it did not feel frightening. It felt alive, as if the ocean, her oldest friend, had decided to dance. She rose and fell with the waves, weightless, her long hair streaming around her like ribbons of ink. The storm broke open, thunder murmuring deep in the clouds, rain falling in sheets that blurred sea and sky together. The ship struggled against the current. Wood groaned, sails tore, voices cried out, and then, in a sound like the sigh of the sea itself, the great vessel shuddered. The little mermaid watched as figures leapt into the water, their shouts carried away by the wind. The prince, she saw him at last, clinging to the rail, his face pale beneath the flashes of light. And then, a moment later, he was gone. Without hesitation, she dove beneath the waves. The world below was dark and full of motion, ribbons of foam, shadows of drifting wreckage, but she moved through it easily, guided by the deep's quiet pulse. The currents wrapped around her like silk, carrying her toward him. There, sinking slowly, his hair flowing like seaweed, his hands reaching for nothing. She swam to him and gathered him close. He was heavy in her arms, his eyes closed, his breath stilled. She rose through the water, the weight of him no burden at all, until they broke the surface. The storm's fury had already begun to fade. The sea was calmer now, though waves still lifted them gently like a cradle. The clouds thinned, revealing the soft light of dawn. She held him close, brushing his wet hair from his forehead. His face looked peaceful, even in sleep. She hummed, instinctively, a low, melodic note that merged with the rhythm of the tide. The sound seemed to settle the sea itself, as though the ocean paused to listen. As daylight spread across the horizon, she saw land ahead, pale cliffs and a small shore lined with wildflowers. The tide carried them closer. She guided him through the shallows, careful that the waves did not break too harshly around him. When at last they reached the beach, she laid him gently on the sand. For the first time, she touched earth, cool and solid beneath her fingers. It felt strange but steady. She looked at the prince, the rise and fall of his chest faint but sure. He was breathing. She smiled, a soft, tired smile of quiet joy. The light of morning gilded the water around her, and the storm's remnants drifted away like fading dreams. In the distance she heard voices, laughter, footsteps. A girl appeared at the top of the dunes, her dress fluttering in the breeze. The mermaid hesitated, her heart full of both wonder and ache. The humans would come for him now. He would live. But she would have to leave. She brushed his cheek once more, the way one might trace the edge of a dream they're not ready to wake from. Then she slipped back into the waves. From the water, she watched as the girl knelt beside the prince, calling out for help. He stirred, eyes half opening beneath the morning sun. He spoke faintly, not seeing the one who had saved him, and yet when he smiled, the little mermaid felt warmth rise through her chest, brighter than any light she'd known below. The tide lifted her gently, pulling her back toward the open sea. She didn't cry, she didn't sigh, she only whispered, "He's safe." And as she sank once more beneath the calm blue surface, the world above her blurred into light, soft, golden, and endlessly kind. Days passed, though time beneath the sea flows differently, slower, quieter, like the tide breathing in and out. The young mermaid returned to her coral home, but the world there no longer felt the same. The songs of her sisters were sweet as ever, the coral gardens bright as before, yet something within her had changed. When she closed her eyes, she saw sunlight filtering through storm clouds, the soft curve of the prince's smile as the dawn touched his face. She thought of his hands warm against hers even as the sea carried them to shore. And she thought of the sound of wind, how it had felt to breathe air even for a moment. Her grandmother noticed her quietness. "You have seen the world above," she said gently. "Now you must learn to live with what it left in you." The mermaid nodded, but she could not help herself. Her gaze drifted always upward, toward the shimmer of the surface. She wondered what it might be like to walk where the wind moved through trees, to speak without the sea's echo, to share her songs with those who did not know the deep. She did not wish to leave her world, only to understand it more completely. And so one night when the moon hung low and full over the water, she swam toward the open plain of the sea, where the coral faded to sand and the light dimmed to green shadow. There, in the stillest part of the deep, lived the sea witch. The water grew cooler as the mermaid descended. Strange plants grew along the ocean floor, their tendrils moving like slow, curious fingers. Shells the size of houses lay half buried in sand. In the silence, she heard the faint hum of something ancient, not cruel, just vast. At last, she saw the witch's home, a hollow formed from the skeleton of a whale, its bones draped in seaweed and lit from within by small, pulsing lights. The witch sat inside, her hair flowing around her like dark smoke, her eyes as calm as low tide. "So," she said, her voice smooth as the current, "you are the one who dreams of walking." The mermaid bowed her head. "I wish to see the world above," she said softly, "to walk among them, to live where the air moves and the stars burn closer." The witch smiled, not kindly but not unkindly either. "Every wish has its weight," she said. "What would you give in return?" The mermaid hesitated. "I have nothing," she said, "nothing of gold or pearls." The witch's gaze softened slightly. "Ah," she murmured, "but you have a voice finer than any human song. That will be your gift and your price." The mermaid touched her throat. Her song, the one that comforted whales and stirred the water itself. The thought of losing it made her chest ache. "And in return?" she asked quietly. "In return," said the witch, "you shall have legs instead of a tail. You will walk among them as one of their own. You will feel the air on your skin, and you may stand beside your prince if that is where your heart leads you. But remember, every step will remind you of where you came from." The mermaid thought for a long time. Her heart was not filled with desperation, only with an ache to know, to experience life beyond the boundary of the sea, not to escape, but to understand. At last she nodded. "I accept." The witch reached for a shell that glowed softly blue. She filled it with water that shimmered like moonlight, whispering words that rippled through the deep. Then she handed it to the mermaid. "When you rise with the dawn," said the witch, "drink this upon the shore. The sea will carry you to the place where you belong." The mermaid took the shell, her hands trembling not from fear, but from reverence. She bowed once more and turned toward the open sea. As she swam upward, the water around her brightened. The light returned, soft, rippling, full of gold. Above her the surface shimmered like a promise. She held the shell close to her heart and whispered, though no sound came, "Whatever happens, I will remember the sea." When she broke through the waves, the first blush of morning had already touched the horizon. She swam toward the shore where she had once left the prince, the sand cool beneath the shallow water. Kneeling there, she lifted the shell to her lips and drank. The ocean seemed to exhale. The tide drew back, then surged forward, wrapping her in warmth and light. The water changed, bright, swirling, full of colour. She felt her tail dissolve, the scales turning to mist, her body lighter, unfamiliar, free. The waves placed her gently upon the sand, her long hair spreading like sea foam around her. She breathed, air, real air, and it filled her like song. Though her voice was gone, her heart was louder than ever. The sea whispered behind her, "Go." And when she opened her eyes, the world above waited, vast, golden, and new. The morning light was soft as breath upon the sea. The waves moved in long, slow curls, whispering against the sand before retreating again into themselves. On the shore, the young mermaid, no longer a creature of the deep, opened her eyes to the bright world of air. At first, everything shimmered. The sky, vast and endless, arched above her like a living painting. Clouds drifted lazily in shades of white and silver, and the sunlight lay across her skin in gentle warmth. She reached up, fingers trembling, to feel it. The warmth soaked into her palms, her wrists, her heart. It was different from the heat of underwater fire or the glow of coral. It was lighter, freer. She looked down and gasped softly. Her tail was gone. In its place were two slender legs, pale and strange beneath the golden morning light. They felt fragile and miraculous all at once. The waves lapped at her feet as if to say goodbye. For a long time she sat there, letting the tide move in and out, breathing the rhythm of this new world. The scent of salt and flowers mingled in the air. Birdsong floated from the cliffs above. Each sound was a wonder. So many notes, all woven into the same quiet symphony. She tried to sing, but no sound came. Her voice, the one she had given, was gone. For a moment, a pang passed through her, like a ripple of longing. But then the wind brushed her face, cool and kind, and she realized she was still surrounded by music, the music of everything else. As the sun climbed higher, she rose slowly to her feet. The sand shifted beneath her, cool and uncertain, but she steadied herself, taking one small step, then another. It was like learning to dance in a dream. Strange at first, but beautiful once she found the rhythm. Each step reminded her of the witch's words. "You will feel the world more deeply now." And she did. Every grain of sand beneath her toes, every brush of wind against her hair, all of it sang with life. Ahead, a path led through tall reeds and into a grove of wild flowers. She followed it, her movements quiet, her curiosity endless. The flowers turned their faces toward the sun, swaying gently as if in greeting. Bees moved from bloom to bloom, their low hum steady and reassuring. She smiled, and though her voice was silent, her heart felt as if it were singing. By midday, she came to the edge of a garden surrounded by white stone walls. Beyond it stood a small palace, golden domes glinting in the sunlight. It was the same place she had seen from the sea, the home of the prince. The gates were open, and music floated through the courtyard. Soft strings, the sound of laughter, the pulse of life. She hesitated only for a moment before stepping forward. Inside, servants moved gracefully, carrying baskets of fruit and fresh linen. Children played near the fountains, their laughter echoing like bells. When they saw her, they paused. A strange, barefoot girl with eyes as bright as the ocean. But her presence was so gentle, so full of calm, that none were afraid. A maid approached her kindly. "Are you lost?" she asked. The mermaid smiled, shaking her head. She could not speak, but her gaze was clear, full of quiet warmth. The maid gestured for her to follow and brought her to a shaded terrace. There, seated among cushions and scrolls, was the prince, He looked up, the same face she remembered from that night, though now touched with sunlight. For a long moment, neither moved. He rose and stepped toward her, his expression full of quiet wonder. "It's you," he said softly, though he didn't know why he felt certain. "You remind me of someone, a dream perhaps." She smiled, the same serene, knowing smile she had worn beneath the waves. He reached for her hand and she let him, her fingers light in his. They stood there, silent, but it was the kind of silence that felt like music. He led her to a seat beside him, offering food, water, rest. She accepted each gift with gratitude, her gestures graceful and still. Though her voice was gone, her presence spoke volumes of gentleness, of curiosity, of quiet strength. The prince felt peace beside her, though he could not explain it. Her calm seemed to slow the world around them, as though time itself moved at the rhythm of her breath. That evening, as the sun set, he walked with her through the palace gardens. The air shimmered gold and rose, and the fountains caught the fading light in soft arcs of silver. She paused at the edge of the reflecting pool and knelt. The water rippled beneath her touch, the reflection of her face merging with the colours of the sky. For a moment she saw both worlds, the sea she had left and the one she had chosen. The prince watched her quietly. He felt as if he had known her forever, though he spoke of his life, his duties, his dreams. She needed no words to answer. Her eyes held oceans of understanding. As night fell, lanterns were lit along the garden path. The prince turned to her and said, "You may stay here if you wish. This place feels brighter when you are in it." She nodded, her heart calm and full. And as the stars began to appear above them, she looked toward the distant horizon where sea met sky and smiled, knowing that though she had traded one voice for another, she had found her way to stillness, to wonder, to light. The days that followed were filled with sunlight and stillness. The mermaid, now living among the humans, moved through the palace like a quiet song, noticed by all but understood by few. She had no voice to speak, yet her presence softened every space she entered. Flowers seemed to lift their faces as she passed. Birds paused their flight to watch her cross the garden paths. And wherever she sat, a kind of peace settled, the kind that doesn't come from silence alone, but from a heart at ease with the world. The prince often sought her company. He would find her beside the fountains, tracing her fingers through the water, or standing on the terrace, gazing toward the sea. He asked her questions she could not answer in words, yet somehow he always understood. There was no need for language between them, only the quiet rhythm of two souls recognizing something kindred. Sometimes he would read aloud to her, old stories of the stars, of voyages, of love that endured through storms. She would listen, smiling softly, the rise and fall of his voice blending with the wind in the trees. When he paused, she would meet his eyes and nod as though to say, "I know." And though her heart longed for him, it was not a restless love. It was steady, like the tide that moves beneath the moon, unseen but unending. One evening they walked together along the shore. The sun had just set and the waves shimmered with the last of its light. The prince spoke of dreams, of finding the woman who had saved him that stormy night, the one he believed had carried him to safety. The mermaid listened, her hands clasped gently before her. She wanted to tell him the truth, that it had been her arms that lifted him, her voice that sang through the storm. But the promise she had made to the sea held her voice quiet. And perhaps, she thought, the truth was not in words, but in presence, in simply being near him, as constant as the tide. He turned to her, his expression kind. "You remind me of her," he said softly, "of the girl in my dreams. You are like the sea, calm and deeper than I can understand." She smiled, the faintest shimmer in her eyes. Her heart ached, yes, but it was a gentle ache, the kind that teaches rather than breaks. The palace grew quieter as autumn came. The air turned cool, and the trees along the terrace dropped golden leaves into the fountains. The mermaid spent her mornings walking the gardens alone. She would pause by the edge of the reflecting pool and touch the water's surface, watching the ripples spread outward until they disappeared. She missed the sea, the soft pulse of its heartbeat, the weightless calm of its embrace. But she did not regret her choice. She had traded her voice for experience, her song for silence, and in that silence she had learned to listen to the world in new ways. The murmur of wind, the rhythm of footsteps, the unspoken language of kindness. She had come to understand that love was not always about possession or being seen. Sometimes it was simply about remaining present, gentle, constant, even when the heart must stay quiet. One night, as the moon rose full and round above the sea, she wandered down to the shore alone. The waves moved softly over the sand, glowing faintly in the moonlight. She stood, ankle deep in the water, her gown brushing against her legs, and for a moment she closed her eyes and imagined she could still feel the currents carrying her. The sea whispered to her, not in words but in memory. It told her that love could change form and still remain true, that what she sought was not distance or difference, but depth, the kind that lives quietly inside the heart. She opened her eyes and smiled through the tears she didn't know she'd shed. The tide touched her feet as if in blessing, then slipped away again. The prince found her there moments later, standing in the light of the moon. He said nothing at first, simply watched her, understanding more than words could ever hold. He stepped beside her and took her hand, their fingers twining like threads of water and air. "I don't know why," he said softly, "but when I am near you, I feel as though I've known you forever." She turned toward him, her gaze luminous and calm. No words, no sound, just the soft curve of a smile, like a secret she would never need to tell. And as they stood together by the sea, the waves rose and fell around them, their rhythm slow and sure. The wind carried the faint scent of salt and jasmine, and above them the stars shimmered like distant reflections of their joined hands. In that moment, the mermaid understood something deeper than longing. Love, she thought, was not a thing to be spoken or owned. It was something to be felt, quietly, endlessly, like the sea itself. Winter came softly to the kingdom by the sea. The days grew shorter, the sky quieter, the air filled with a silvery hush that seemed to settle on every leaf and wave. The palace stood wrapped in that calm, warm fires flickering in its windows, the scent of cedarwood curling through the halls. The mermaid, now part of this world above, felt the season not as loss, but as stillness. She walked each morning along the pale shore, where the tide moved gently in and out, tracing the line between sea and land like a breath. The waves greeted her in their own language, a low murmur, soft and constant. She answered in silence, her heart understanding every word. The prince, ever kind, kept her near. He did not know the shape of her past, only that her presence steadied him. She was his quiet companion, the calm in his busy days. When he spoke of the future, of journeys, of kingdoms, of love, she listened without sadness. She knew that her path had always been one of stillness, not possession. One morning, as snow fell gently over the sea, she stood at the water's edge and looked out at the horizon. The world felt suspended, sky and ocean one soft shade of silver. The sea seemed to call her name without sound. A long time had passed since she had heard that call. It was not commanding, it was welcoming. It carried the tenderness of home, the gentle voice of the place she had come from. The tide crept closer, curling around her feet. She did not step back. Instead, she knelt and touched the water. It was cold, but not unkind. Beneath the surface, light shimmered faintly, soft gold rippling through blue. The mermaid smiled. The sea had not forgotten her. She closed her eyes, remembering the feeling of water holding her weight, the sway of currents, the sound of whales in the distance. And in that memory, she realized something, that the sea had never truly taken her voice. It had simply changed it. Now her song was the quiet steadiness she carried. It was in the peace she gave others, in the light she left behind. It was the love she had found, not as possession, but as presence. She understood then that love was not about staying, nor about leaving. It was about becoming part of everything one has ever touched. And in that moment, she felt both worlds, the deep and the surface, merge within her heart. The prince joined her there, his cloak brushing the snow. "You always come here," he said softly, "to the water." "Why?" She smiled and touched his hand, then pressed her palm to her heart. He nodded, understanding more than words could tell. "You belong to the sea," he said gently, "but I think the sea belongs to you as well." She looked out over the water once more. The horizon gleamed faintly gold, as if the sun were waiting just below. The tide rose higher, reaching for her like an embrace. As the first light of dawn broke over the ocean, she took one step forward, then another. The water closed around her, warm despite the snow. The prince called out, not in fear, but in wonder, as a soft light bloomed where she stood. It shimmered like morning mist, like the space between dream and waking. And when it faded, she was gone. Only the calm sea remained, its surface smooth and luminous. Yet in the days that followed, when he walked by the shore, he could feel her there, in the rhythm of the waves, in the hush between heartbeats, in every quiet moment that made the world seem softer. The sea had given her back to itself, not in loss, but in peace. Her spirit became part of its song, steady, kind, eternal. And whenever the tide whispered along the sand, it carried her melody, the one that had always been hers, only now vast and free. That night, The prince stood by the shore and looked to the horizon, the stars trembling like candlelight above the water. He closed his eyes, listening to the sea's gentle murmur, and thought he could hear her voice, not as sound, but as warmth. He smiled, knowing that love, once found, never truly leaves. It only changes shape, like water becoming mist, or waves turning into sky. And so the sea grew calm once more. Its waves shimmered beneath the moon, carrying whispers of light across the quiet world. Somewhere deep beneath that silver surface, the Little Mermaid's song continued. Not lost, not gone, only changed. It became part of everything, the hush of water, the breath of the wind, the heartbeat of the earth itself. And as that soft melody drifted inland, it met the edge of a quiet forest, a place where the air smelled of jasmine and pine, and the sky blushed pale before dawn. Here, another song waited to be heard, not from the sea, but from a single small bird whose voice could soften even the coldest heart. Tonight we follow that song, from ocean's lullaby to forest's whisper, from silence to sound reborn. This is the Nightingale, a story of truth, beauty, and the quiet power of an honest voice. So breathe deeply, let the music of the night surround you, and together let's wander into the gardens of the Emperor's palace, where the nightingale waits to sing. The night had softened into that blue hour when lanterns look like small moons and the world speaks in whispers. Beyond tall white walls and curved jade roofs lay the Emperor's garden, a wide, breathing world of its own, where paths wound like silk ribbons through groves of bamboo and stone bridges arched over streams quiet as thought. The air was cool and fragrant, jasmine, wet leaves, a hint of tea from distant kitchens. Crickets stitched a low, steady music into the edges of silence, and every so often a koi turned in a pond with the softest swirl, as if the water itself had sighed. Servants finished their last tasks of the day, folding silk awnings, trimming a final wick, and then drifted away, their footsteps fading along the lacquered corridors. In the hush that followed, the garden seemed to sit up and listen to itself. Lantern light trembled on lacquered trunks. Dew gathered on the tips of grass like tiny stars deciding whether to fall. Farther in, past the peony court and the stone lions that watched with polished patience, a young kitchen maid slipped through a moon gate and paused to breathe. She had flour on her sleeve and steam in her hair, the warmth of the scullery still clinging to her skin. Here, though, the air was clean. She closed her eyes and stood very still, the way one stands to hear something delicate. There, at first no more than a thread of silver sound, a note lifted from the trees. It perched on the air, then lengthened into a line as clear and light as water sliding over glass. The maid opened her eyes. The note unfurled into a phrase, the phrase into a quiet, effortless song. It was not proud, it was not large, but it carried the coolness of dawn and the warmth of a hand wrapped around a cup. It carried the feeling of being seen by the moon. She knew this voice. Everyone who worked late in the palace knew it. Each night, when braziers dimmed and the kitchens fell to embers, the song would rise from the bamboo grove or the plum trees or the outer lake, never the same place twice and never loud, always as if it were being offered to the night rather than performed for it. Some said it was a spirit. Some said it was only the wind moving through hollow reed. The maid remembered an old gardener once saying softly, "It's the nightingale." He had smiled in the dark when he said it, as if he were naming a friend. The emperor, of course, had gardens enough to wander for a full year without returning to the same blossom twice, and treasures enough to weigh down 100 tables. But the court knew that what he loved most, more than jade seals and porcelain bowls, more than rare books and knotwork rugs, was perfection. He loved things arranged, polished, aligned with the compass of his preference. Music, too, was a measure to him. It must be precise. It must be suitable. It must say, "Without error, I am here." Tonight, a new atlas had arrived from distant lands, its pages painted with unfamiliar coasts and mountains, its cities pricked with gold points. At the margin of one map, near the drawn curve of this very palace, the cartographer had written in a small, neat hand, "Here sings the nightingale, whose voice is the soft soul of the empire." The emperor had read the line 3 times, then lifted his eyes to the window where a piece of evening sky showed like a silk square. "Find it," he said finally, not unkindly. "If such a bird exists in my garden, I will hear it." Courtiers bowed, messengers hurried. Lamps were lit in rooms that had never needed lamps at night. The palace filled with the careful clatter of search, drawers opened, lists unfurled, questions carried like trays from doorway to doorway. Where does it sing? When? What tree? What water? What colour are its feathers? Does it bow? Does it know the music of the court? No one knew. Those who had heard the song had mostly heard it alone, and the ones who told the story best were the ones who had no titles to lose by telling it softly. The kitchen maid had not meant to be asked anything, but in the way that news travels when it is in a hurry, a steward saw her standing by the moon gate and said, "You. Have you heard it?" She bowed. "Often," she whispered, "when the soup is cooling." The steward's eyebrows lifted. "Show us." So now she stood beneath the bamboo, and the steward stood beside her with 2 guards who looked as if they had never listened to a leaf in their lives. Lanterns were shielded to a blush of light. The crickets kept time. The song came again, a single note, lightly placed, like a bead on a thread. The maid raised a hand not to point, but to calm. "No torches," she breathed, "no clapping, just breathe." They waited. The note lifted and falling, gathered and released, as natural as waves arriving at a shore. It did not make a show of itself. It moved as the air moved and left its warmth behind. The steward felt something loosen between his ribs, a place he did not know had been knotted. "It's small," he said, surprised to hear reverence in his own voice. "Small and everything," the maid said, smiling to the dark. From the far bough of a pine, the singer appeared, plain as a river stone, grey-brown as bark after rain. The nightingale's throat shimmered with the labourless effort of sound, and then it lifted from the branch and came to rest on a low railing no farther than an outstretched arm. The lantern's edge of light caught in its eye. The bird looked at them without fear, the way something wild yet whole looks at the world when it knows the world can be gentle. The steward bowed to a bird for the first time in a long career. "Honoured knight," he said, adjusting language hastily, "the Son of Heaven requests your presence." The bird sang 2 notes in reply, not refusal, not acceptance, more like the sound a key makes when turned in a door you thought was only decoration. The maid listened and translated the only way such a thing can be translated. "We must go slowly," she murmured. "The garden knows that haste breaks bridges." So they went slowly. The guards walked behind, stepping lightly as if across a sleeping floor. The steward cupped his lantern as one cups a flame in wind. The maid walked without looking at the bird, so the bird would not be made into a mirror. And the nightingale flew a little, perched, flew again, stitching song to path, leading them past water that remembered the moon and pavilions where poets once fell asleep mid-syllable. At the final corridor, the palace opened to a quiet hall with a high painted ceiling where cranes tilted their heads among clouds. The emperor sat not on his great throne but slightly to the side, near an open window where the night could enter. He had set aside the atlas, his hands were still. Outside, somewhere, a breeze moved the bells that hung from the eaves. They chimed like small thoughts passing harmlessly through the mind. The steward sank to his knees. The guards bowed. The maid hesitated at the threshold, flower no longer on her sleeve but humble in the memory of it. The nightingale stayed just beyond the line of lantern light, as if to show respect to the dark. "Welcome," the emperor said, in a voice that sounded careful and almost young. He did not reach out. He did not command. "If you are the nightingale, I would be honored to listen." For a heartbeat, nothing. The world balanced on the rim of itself. The maid could hear the thin thread of stream beyond the wall, the small breath the emperor took and released without sound, the patient hinge of the night. Then the bird sang. It was not a court song. It did not measure the room and fill it. Instead, it measured the breath and filled that. The notes were clear and close to the bone, the way truth is clear and close when spoken quietly between friends. The first phrase was "dawn in bamboo," a pale light finding its way through narrow leaves. The second was rain arriving to a thirsty path. The third, a kettle deciding it is time. Between them, space. Within the space, care. The emperor's shoulders lowered by the width of one unneeded thought. The steward's eyes softened into something like gratitude. The guards remembered their mothers. The kitchen maid closed her eyes and did not move. When the song ended, the room felt wider than when it began, not because anything had changed, but because everything had been seen. The emperor inclined his head. "Thank you," he said. The words were simple and perfect. The nightingale fluttered as if to say the song had thanked the room as well. Then it gave one last, almost whisper of a note, barely there, exactly enough, and lifted to the rafters where shadow and gold leaf met, and neither insisted on being right. "Tomorrow," the emperor said at last, softly to the steward, "invite the court to listen, but no trumpets, no drums. The garden will be our orchestra, the night will conduct." The steward bowed. The maid exhaled. Outside, the crickets took up their gentle work again, as if they had simply paused to let a friend speak. The lanterns were dimmed. The map was closed. The garden breathed. And somewhere above the painted cranes, a small bird tucked its head beneath its wing, trusting the roof to hold, trusting the dark to be kind. Sleep came easily to the palace that night, as if the song had placed a hand on every brow and smoothed it once, the way a mother does when the story is over. Morning came with a sky clear as polished jade. The palace stirred earlier than usual, as if it too had heard the nightingale's song and woken lighter, softer. Servants moved quietly, not daring to clatter dishes or strike bells too hard. Even the fountains seemed to murmur in gentler tones. The emperor's order had spread like perfume through the halls. Tonight the bird will sing again, and so, all day long, the palace prepared, not in haste, but in careful reverence. In the courtyards, musicians tuned their instruments, though they were told they would not play. They simply wished to honor the sound that had left the garden glowing. In the kitchens, cooks prepared sweet rice and soft dumplings scented with orange peel and honey. The air shimmered with quiet anticipation, like the pause before a note begins. By sunset, the palace had become a lantern of light. Silk banners drifted from the terraces, candles flickered along the paths, their flames bending gently toward the sea breeze. The emperor sat beneath a canopy of woven gold threads, his face calm, expectant. One by one courtiers entered, adorned in robes bright as sunrise, fans fluttering like moth wings. Their words were soft, but their curiosity shone brightly in their eyes. They had all heard rumors of the bird whose song could still the air, who could move an emperor to silence, and yet most expected a spectacle, something grand, something fit for court. When the nightingale appeared, however, it was smaller than they had imagined. A tiny grey bird perched upon a branch that had been carried in from the garden. It bowed its head slightly, feathers glinting only faintly in the lamplight. A ripple of surprise passed through the crowd. "That?" someone whispered. "It's so plain." Another murmured, "Surely there must be some mistake." But the emperor lifted a hand for quiet. "The beauty of a song," he said softly, "is not in the feather, but in the breath." And then he nodded to the bird. The nightingale began to sing. The first note was simple, a single thread of silver sound that hung in the stillness. Then it deepened, twining gently with the air, filling the space between heartbeat and breath. Each phrase rose like mist over water, carrying with it the scent of rain and the hush of distant mountains. The courtiers stilled. Even those who had whispered now listened, their fans forgotten, their jewels dim beside the living light of that sound. For the song was not perfect in the way they understood perfection. It wavered slightly, as living things do. But in its softness, it carried truth, the kind that touches without permission and heals without asking. When the last note faded, the silence that followed felt golden, as though sound itself had left behind a trace of light. The emperor bowed his head. He did not speak. He did not need to. In the days that followed, the nightingale became a cherished guest at court. It sang at dawn when the palace still slept, and again at twilight when the world exhaled. The emperor would pause his meetings just to listen. Messengers and ministers learned to wait, their voices lowered out of respect. The bird was never kept in a cage. It came and went as it pleased, sometimes gone for days, then returning with new melodies, songs that sounded of rain on bamboo, of moonlight on water, of laughter remembered by trees. The emperor began to sleep better. He smiled more. The palace grew quieter, less proud. Even the peacocks in the garden seemed to strut with less vanity. But in time, word of the nightingale spread beyond the palace walls. Poets wrote of it. Artists painted it. Merchants brought mechanical birds from distant lands, carved of silver and jade, promising that they too could sing. When the first such toy arrived, a gift from a foreign prince, it gleamed under the lanterns, its jewelled feathers catching every light. With the turn of a key, it began to sing, clear, precise, and perfect. Its voice chimed like crystal, repeating the same lovely melody again and again. The court gasped in delight. They clapped, marvelled, bowed. "It is wondrous!" cried one. "So exact, so flawless," said another. The emperor smiled politely, though his eyes were thoughtful. He looked toward the window where the real nightingale perched in the twilight. The little bird sang once, a quiet phrase, softer than the ticking of the jewelled toy. Then, without sound or ceremony, it lifted its wings and vanished into the dusk. The courtiers applauded the mechanical bird once more, unaware that they were clapping into silence. That night, when the halls grew still again, the emperor walked alone into the garden. He stood by the pond where the water mirrored the moon and listened for the sound he had come to know, but there was only wind and the faint rustle of reeds. Still he smiled, for he knew the nightingale's song was not gone, only free. Real music, he thought, belongs first to the air and then to the heart, and in the hush that followed, he could almost hear it again, faint but true, drifting between the branches, carrying with it the same calm that had once stilled the world. The seasons turned gently over the palace. The banners faded, the flowers changed, and with them, so too did the emperor. He grew quieter, more inward, his days marked not by ceremony, but by silence. The jewelled bird still perched on its golden stand beside his bed. Each morning the servants wound it carefully, and each morning it sang the same bright tune, perfect, precise, unchanging. Its little gears clicked softly as it turned from side to side, its ruby eyes flashing with mechanical light. The courtiers praised it still. They bowed low and smiled, but the emperor no longer smiled back. He would listen, nod politely, and then dismiss them all. When the halls were empty, he would look to the open window, beyond the silk curtains, beyond the shining roofs, and think of the one who had once sung freely from the garden. He would think of that soft, living sound, the one that trembled and breathed, the one that carried the scent of rain. The jewelled bird sang flawlessly, but perfection, he now understood, has no pulse. Winter arrived, quiet and white. The ponds froze into glass. The gardens fell asleep beneath a quilt of snow. Inside, the emperor's chamber glowed with low firelight. He lay among silks and soft pillows, his breath shallow, his eyes heavy with the weight of too many years. The courtiers whispered in the hall, afraid to disturb the hush that had gathered around his bed. The jewelled bird sat still, its springs long unwound. It could sing no more. The servants were careful not to touch it, as though afraid that even its silence might shatter. And in that stillness, as the last candles burned low, the emperor found himself alone, truly alone. He closed his eyes and thought of all he had gathered, treasures, titles, songs that had belonged to others, and yet none of them filled the quiet, none of them breathed. He whispered into the dark, his voice barely more than wind. I wish to hear the garden once more. Outside, beyond the walls, the night was deep and full of snowlight. The world seemed to hold its breath, and then so faintly that it might have been only memory. A note rose from the air. At first he thought he was dreaming, but the sound grew clearer, warmer, alive. It entered through the open window and lingered at the edge of the room, trembling like a candle flame. The nightingale had returned. It perched quietly upon the stand where the jewelled bird once glittered, its feathers plain, its eyes bright with the calm of knowing. It sang, not loudly, not grandly, but with the steady pulse of life itself. Each note seemed to breathe for him, each phrase to remind his heart how to move again. The air in the room softened, the shadows lifted, and for the first time in many nights, the Emperor smiled. "Why do you come?" he whispered. "I forgot you. I let them replace you." The nightingale sang on as if to say, "You called and I heard." The Emperor closed his eyes, the sound washing over him like warm rain. He felt his strength return, quiet and slow, as if the song were stitching him gently back together. When at last the bird stopped, the room was full of dawn. The sky outside had begun to pale. The first light fell across the Emperor's face, and with it came breath, deep, steady, certain. The servants entered and gasped softly. They found their Emperor sitting upright, the jewelled bird resting still beside him, and the living one perched by the window. He turned to them and smiled. "Let it be," he said, pointing to the real nightingale. "No cage, no command. When it wishes, it will sing." The courtiers bowed deeply, their eyes lowered in quiet awe. The Emperor reached out his hand, and the bird came to rest upon his wrist. Its tiny claws pressed lightly into his skin, a pulse meeting a pulse. He looked at it for a long while and said softly, "I had forgotten that beauty breathes." The nightingale tilted its head, then took flight, leaving the chamber open to the light of a new day. After that morning, the Emperor walked again through his garden. The air smelled of thawing earth and early blossoms. When he passed the bamboo grove, the nightingale's song followed, not constant, not commanded, but always near. And those who saw him say that when he paused to listen, it was as though the whole palace listened too, the marble, the water, even the air. For it was not just the Emperor's heart that had been mended. It was the quiet between things, the still, breathing space where life and love and truth make their home. Spring returned to the empire with a hush of green. The frost melted from the eaves, the rivers loosened their sigh, and pale blossoms began to drift across the emperor's gardens like slow falling snow. The world seemed newly washed, not loud with celebration, but calm with renewal. In that quiet, the emperor walked often among the trees. He moved slowly now, not from weakness, but from a kind of reverence. Each step was a conversation with the earth. Each breath carried the faintest trace of birdsong, the one voice that had never truly left him. He still wore his silk robes, still held court, still received envoys from distant lands. But the great jewels on his sleeves no longer gleamed as brightly as the dew on the bamboo leaves, and he seemed pleased by that. When his ministers spoke of wars and trade and policy, he listened, but sometimes his gaze would wander toward the open window, where sunlight shifted across the floor like rippling water. And when they paused, he would smile and say simply, "Tell me, Did you hear the garden this morning? At first they thought it a metaphor. Later they learned to listen too. The nightingale came and went as it pleased. Sometimes it sang at dawn, when the sky blushed faintly gold and the palace still dreamed. Sometimes it sang by moonlight, perched on the emperor's window frame, its shadow quivering softly against the silk curtain. And sometimes it did not sing at all, and that too was part of the song. It never wore a collar, it was never summoned, it belonged to no one. Yet somehow it always returned. Its music was not the same as before. It had changed, quieter now, less like youth's bright melody and more like memory itself, gentle, reflective, full of space. When the emperor listened, he did not imagine beauty. He felt it, not as possession, but as presence. Years passed, and with them the empire continued its slow turning. Summers of light, winters of thought. The emperor aged gracefully, his once black hair streaked with silver that gleamed like starlight under the lanterns. He grew fond of sitting in the garden pavilion long after the servants had gone, a pot of tea cooling beside him, the scent of plum blossoms thick in the air. Sometimes, if one passed quietly enough, one could hear him speaking softly to the darkness. "Your song still lingers here," he would say. "I have learned that it was never mine to keep. It was mine to hear." The nightingale would answer from somewhere unseen, a single phrase or even just a flutter of wings, and that was enough. In time a new emperor would come, and the old one's name would fade into stories. But the garden remained, vast and breathing, its pools and bridges gleaming under the same slow-moving sky. And there, on certain nights when the moon hung low and the world was hushed, a small grey bird could still be heard singing among the bamboo. No one knew where it came from. No one tried to catch it. They only listened. Its voice was the same voice that had once stopped a kingdom, the same song that had once mended a single weary heart. And though it rose and vanished again into the air, its echo stayed, in the leaves, in the water, in every quiet moment that reminded people to pause and breathe. And so, the emperor's garden remained a place of listening, not for glory, not for spectacle, but for truth. The kind of truth that comes without demand, that needs no audience to be beautiful. The kind that reminds us that even the smallest song freely given can outlast every golden cage. When the wind moved through the plum trees, it carried the memory of that song across the pond, over the wall, and out into the sleeping city, where someone, hearing it faintly in their dreams, might smile and rest a little deeper. And somewhere between that dream and the dawn, the nightingale's song continued, not in sound, but in stillness, not in ownership, but in grace, forever free, forever true. And so the nightingale's song drifted into memory, a sound so gentle it seemed to fold itself into the world. Its notes became the hush of dawn, the whisper of leaves, the breath between heartbeats. In that stillness, peace settled like a blanket of light, soft, endless, calm. But the world, like all hearts, turns through its seasons. The song of summer gives way to the hush of snow, and warmth finds its echo in the cool air of reflection. Far to the north, where the moon lies close to the earth and the air rings clear as crystal, another story begins. a story of friendship and courage, of a girl whose heart shines with warmth and a boy whose spirit is lost beneath the frost. A story that reminds us that even in the coldest winter, love remains the one flame that does not fade. Tonight, we leave the lantern-lit gardens behind and follow the snow's quiet path into the heart of winter. This is the Snow Queen, a tale of light, love, and the long journey home. So take a deep breath, feel the hush of falling snow around you, and let us drift gently into this story, where winter dreams and hearts of ice begin to thaw. It began long ago, before anyone remembered to count the winters, when the world was young and snow still learned how to fall. High above the mountains, where stars looked close enough to touch, there lived a strange, quiet being, neither cruel nor kind, but curious in ways the heart could not quite understand. Some said it was a spirit made of wind and glass. Others whispered that it was the breath of winter itself. Whatever its name, it loved to make mirrors, delicate things of ice and light, smooth as frozen lakes and clear as morning air. The first mirrors it made were beautiful. They caught sunlight in 1,000 patterns, painting the snow in ribbons of silver. But one day it thought to make a mirror that did more than reflect, one that could reveal what it believed was true, and so it shaped a great pane of frost, thin as a breath and sharp as truth without kindness. It smiled to see its own face in it, bright and perfect. Then it tilted the glass toward the world. What it showed was not the beauty of things, but their flaws, their cracks, their smallest, weakest parts. A flower reflected in it seemed wilted. A face became harsh, the eyes too cold. The mirror did not lie, but it forgot that love is what makes truth bearable. The spirit watched, amused, as the world looked smaller in that glass. Then one day, perhaps by chance, perhaps by design, the mirror slipped from its grasp. It fell, down through the clouds, through the blue and the white, through sunlight and storm. It shattered against the air itself. Thousands of pieces scattered, carried on the wind, invisible, glittering, drifting across the world. Some pieces were as small as snowflakes, some no larger than dust, and wherever they fell, the world changed a little. When a shard found its way into someone's eye, they saw only what was wrong. A single imperfection would eclipse the whole. When a piece slipped into the heart, it cooled what had once been warm. Love turned to logic, and laughter became something to be studied, not shared. The wind carried those tiny fragments far and wide. They melted into snow, into rain, into silence, and the world, not knowing, learned to shiver. Many years passed. The mirror was forgotten, or thought to be only a tale for firesides, something to whisper about while frost gathered on the windows, but the air still carried the faint glitter of its broken truth. And somewhere, in a quiet little town tucked between the hills and the river, 2 children would soon learn what it meant to see through glass. Their names were Gerda and Kai. They lived in small houses side by side, their windows looking into one another's. In summer they shared a garden, roses climbing up the wooden fences, their petals soft and red as the evening sky. In winter they built forts of snow and laughed until their cheeks glowed. They were not siblings, but they loved each other as though they were. Gerda was gentle and open-hearted, the kind of child who stopped to rescue beetles from puddles and made wishes on every falling leaf. Kai was thoughtful, curious, full of questions. He liked to look at the frost on windows and imagine that it was the handwriting of the sky. Their world was small, but it felt wide enough for every dream. Each morning they met at the garden gate, talking about the clouds, the sun, and where the river might go when it disappeared into mist. In the evenings, they sat by the hearth while Gerda's grandmother told stories of the Snow Queen who ruled a land of pure ice where no heart could ever break because no heart could ever beat. Gerda always shivered, even beneath her blanket, but Kai would smile, eyes bright with wonder. "I'd like to see her," he said once, just once. The Snow Queen. To ask her what the world looks like when it's all silver and still. His grandmother chuckled softly. "She does not visit those who only ask. She visits those who forget to believe in warmth." Kai laughed and leaned closer to the fire. He did not notice the snow outside falling slower than before, each flake like a tiny shard of glass, glittering faintly in the light. That night the wind rose. It moved through the town's narrow streets, gentle but insistent, brushing past windows and whispering through chimneys. When it reached Gerda's and Kai's homes, it paused, as if listening. Inside, the children slept. Gerda's face was peaceful, a faint smile curving her lips as she dreamed of spring. But Kai, restless in his sleep, turned toward the window where frost was forming slow, intricate patterns across the glass. And in that moment, one small fragment, almost invisible, drifted through the narrow crack in the frame. It shimmered once in the lamplight and fell, lighter than dust, onto his pillow. It touched his eye first, then softly it touched his heart. He stirred but did not wake. Outside, the snow grew brighter. The wind moved on. By morning, nothing seemed different. The world looked the same, roofs white with snow, the river frozen like a ribbon of glass. But when Gerda met Kai at the gate, his smile was thinner, his eyes a little cooler. He laughed still, but his laughter no longer reached the air. It stayed close, contained, thoughtful. When she offered him a rose, he took it, but frowned at the small brown edge on one petal. "It's not perfect," he said softly. Gerda tilted her head, surprised. "It's still beautiful," she said. He nodded, but didn't answer. And for the first time, the garden felt a little colder. The wind, high above the rooftops, moved on, carrying with it the faint echo of a mirror that had never truly stopped breaking. And far to the north, beyond the forests and mountains, where the snow fell forever, a queen made of ice opened her eyes. The days that followed were clear and cold, the kind of cold that doesn't bite, but hums softly against the skin like a distant song. The town lay wrapped in frost. Icicles hung from the eaves like glass bells, chiming whenever the wind passed by. The river slept beneath its silver skin, and the air smelled faintly of wood smoke and pine. Kai spent more time by the frozen window than he used to. He would trace the delicate white patterns left by the frost, eyes sharp with wonder. "They're like stars," he said once to Gerda, "but better. They never fall. They stay exactly where they belong." Gerda smiled and nodded, though she missed the warmth in his voice, the way it used to lift when he spoke of flowers or clouds. She noticed now that his laughter had grown quieter, precise, as though weighed and measured before it left his lips. Still, she stayed by him. She told him stories of the sunflowers that would bloom when spring returned, and how the roses would climb the fence again, filling the air with their soft perfume. But when she spoke, Kai only looked toward the sky. "Perhaps," he said gently, "roses only seem beautiful because they fade. Snow never fades." Gerda didn't understand, but she reached out and took his hand. It was cold, and he didn't pull away, but he didn't hold back either. He just looked at her with eyes the color of ice on the river. That evening, snow began to fall again. The flakes drifted down slowly, wide and soft, each one glinting faintly in the lamplight. Gerda stood at her window, watching them gather on the roof, whispering the same wish she made every winter. "Let spring find us soon." Across the narrow garden, in his own small room, Kai watched too. The frost on his window had grown into intricate shapes, forests, rivers, towers, all sculpted by the quiet hand of cold. He leaned close, his breath fogging the glass, and then from within the swirl of snow outside he saw movement, a shape forming, tall, slender, almost transparent. At first he thought it was the snow itself taking form, but as the wind stilled, the shape became clearer. A woman draped in white that shimmered like light through crystal. Her hair glinted silver, her eyes were calm and deep as the winter sky. She stood in the air itself, unbothered by the storm. When she breathed, snowflakes spun softly around her, each one perfect, each one still. Kai did not feel fear, he felt recognition, as though this was the quiet he had been waiting for all along. She raised a hand, and though she stood outside the glass, he felt the chill of her touch on the other side, a coolness that didn't sting, only numbed, like deep peace. Her lips moved. He could not hear her words, but he understood. She was not calling him to follow, not yet. She was showing him what it meant to be without pain, without warmth, without need. For a long moment he gazed into her eyes. They reflected everything: sky, frost, stillness, but no shadow. And then, as the clock struck midnight, the snow swirled, and she was gone. The glass cleared, the frost melted from the pane. Only the faint outline of her hand remained, 5 pale prints that faded as the wind exhaled. In the morning, Gerda knocked softly on Kai's door. He answered with a distant smile, already dressed, already outside in the snow. He had built a small sleigh from wood and rope. "Come," he said, "let's follow the river. It's frozen all the way to the hills. We can see how far it goes." Gerda hesitated. "The river's too wide now. Let's wait for the thaw." But Kai only laughed lightly. "It's fine," he said. "The ice holds everything. It doesn't break." He tugged at the rope, and the sleigh slid easily behind him as he walked toward the gate. Gerda watched him go, his figure growing smaller against the white. Something in her heart stirred, a quiet unease she couldn't name, and somewhere far beyond the town, through forests draped in snow and lakes sleeping beneath the ice, a soft wind moved dash, carrying with it a whisper like a song half remembered. Come where the heart forgets its ache. Come where the world is still. By dusk, Kai was gone. The town lay silent beneath a sky full of falling stars of snow, and Gerda, standing by the empty gate, listened to the river's frozen breath and whispered into the wind, "I will find you." The snow answered with nothing, but high above, where the clouds thinned and the air turned to crystal, the Snow Queen turned her face toward the south and began to move. The morning sky vanished. The world seemed to hold its breath. Gerda waited at their garden gate until the frost on the fence melted beneath her fingertips. She called his name softly at first, then louder, her voice carried away by the empty air. Only the river answered, whispering beneath its shell of ice. When night came and he still had not returned, she went to his grandmother. Together they lit a single candle and set it in the window, its flame trembling behind the glass. "Light guides those who are lost," the old woman said. Gerda nodded and watched until her eyes grew heavy, her heart refusing to rest. In her dreams, she saw snow falling in a silver spiral, and within it, Kai's face, calm and distant, as though he were listening to something she could not hear. When she woke, she knew what she must do. The next morning, before dawn, Gerda packed a small basket, a piece of bread, a shawl, a pair of mittens too big for her hands. She kissed her grandmother's cheek and said, "I'll bring him home." The old woman's eyes glistened. "The road will be long," she whispered. "The snow deep, the days short." Gerda smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't ask permission. "Then I'll walk slowly," she said, "so I don't miss anything beautiful." And so she stepped into the pale morning. The world around her was quiet, the roofs white, the trees silver, the air still as glass. Her boots left small, careful prints in the snow. Behind her, the candle still burned in the window, a tiny sun in a world of frost. She followed the river first, walking beside its frozen path. Where the ice had cracked, she could see dark water moving beneath, steady, secret, alive. The sound comforted her. She spoke to it as she walked. "If you've seen him," she said to the river, "please guide me where he's gone." The water made no promise, but its song changed, low and slow, like a lullaby made of movement. Soon she reached a small boat moored among the reeds. It was old, green paint flaking, its rope stiff with ice. She touched it lightly and the knot slipped free. Before she could step back, the boat began to drift, slow, sure, as if the river had been waiting. Gerda gasped, but then smiled. "All right," she whispered, "take me where you flow." The current carried her gently downstream. Snowflakes melted on her lashes. The sky opened, pale blue stretched thin across the cold. She wrapped herself in her shawl and let the world move around her. Hours passed. She dozed and woke, the steady glide of the water rocking her like a cradle. When she opened her eyes again, she saw a garden, strange and lovely, tucked beside the river bank, its trees blooming even in winter. The branches bowed with flowers of gold and white, and the air shimmered with soft warmth. The boat drifted close, bumping against a low step of stone. A woman stood there, dressed in green, her hair the colour of wheat. Her eyes were kind, though her smile held something secret. "Poor child," she said, "you look half frozen. Come in and rest." Gerda hesitated. but the scent of flowers and the promise of shelter drew her forward. The woman led her into a garden unlike any she had ever seen. Roses bloomed beside violets, and apple trees bent heavy with fruit, though snow fell beyond the gate. The air was warm and full of bee song. "Who are you?" Gerda asked. "A friend," said the woman. "Rest here a while. Forget the cold and sleep." She touched Gerda's hair, and the warmth deepened. Gerda's eyes fluttered, her limbs heavy with comfort. But even as she drifted toward sleep, a rose petal fell against her cheek, and something stirred in her heart. The roses, the ones she and Kai had planted together, their colour, their scent, it woke something true. Her eyes snapped open. "No," she whispered. "I can't stay. I have to find him." The woman's smile flickered, then softened. She sighed, as if remembering something she too had once lost. "Then go," she said quietly, "but take this warmth with you. The world beyond here is colder than you know." Gerda nodded as she stepped beyond the gate. The garden faded behind her, its blossoms turning to frost, its air returning to the scent of pine and snow. The river waited, its current slow but steady. Days turned to weeks. She walked through forests where trees whispered old songs and snowflakes fell so slowly they seemed like dreams that had forgotten how to land. She met crows who spoke in riddles and foxes who offered her paths hidden beneath the drifts. Every kindness she found, every spark of warmth, she tucked in her heart and carried forward. At night she would lie beneath the stars, their cold light gentle upon her face, and whisper to the dark, "I'm coming, Kai. I'm still coming." And sometimes, when she closed her eyes, she could almost hear a reply. A faint sound far away, like the crackle of ice or the slow hum of snow in motion. In the north, where the mountains glowed blue beneath the moon, the Snow Queen rode across the sky in a carriage shaped from wind and crystal. Beside her sat a boy, his eyes the colour of frozen glass. He did not speak, but in his silence the snow sang. Far below them a small figure crossed a field of white, steady and sure. Her red mittens bright against the snow, her heart still burning warm beneath layers of wool. The Queen turned her gaze downward and smiled faintly. "So much warmth," she murmured. "How strange that it endures." And the snow fell faster, not to stop her, but to mark her path. The world grew whiter as Gerda journeyed north. Snow fell in slow spirals, soft as breath. The sky was a pale silver dome, endless and kind, and the air so still it seemed to listen. Each step she took left a faint print that vanished before she could turn to see it fade. She had long since lost count of the days. Time here did not move like it did at home. It unfolded one heartbeat at a time, measured only by the rise and fall of her breath and the soft crunch of snow beneath her boots. The stars hung low, like lanterns strung across the heavens. Sometimes she thought she could hear them, faint chimes, a lullaby for travellers who dared to walk between frost and dream. It was not frightening, it was peaceful, the kind of quiet that feels alive. And always, when her courage wavered, she thought of Kai, his laughter, his questions, the way he used to tilt his head to hear the wind through the reeds. She carried his memory like a flame cupped in her hands. At last the snow thinned. Before her stretched a plain of glass, an endless lake frozen smooth as mirror. The wind paused, waiting. There, in the distance, rose a palace made entirely of ice. Its towers caught the moonlight and scattered it in 1,000 gentle beams. It looked less like a fortress than a cathedral built from breath, silent, shimmering, weightless. Gerda took one slow step, then another. Her reflection followed her across the frozen lake, her red mittens bright against the white. The air shimmered faintly, full of sound she couldn't quite hear, a deep hum, soft and steady, like the heart of winter itself. As she reached the great doors, they opened on their own. No guards, no sound, only stillness, wide and pale, waiting to receive her. Inside the palace was a world of light. The walls glowed faintly blue, like the inside of a flame. The floor sparkled with frost patterns that seemed to shift as she walked, snowflakes forming and dissolving beneath her feet. Columns rose like frozen trees, their branches arching high overhead, and at the centre of it all, beneath a canopy of silver light, sat the Snow Queen. She was not terrible to look upon. She was beautiful in the way quiet is beautiful, vast, perfect, untouched. Her gown flowed like frozen mist, her crown shimmered like falling stars, and her eyes were clear as morning ice. Beside her, on a low seat carved from frost, sat Kai. He was very still. In his hands he held a puzzle made of ice. Tiny, intricate pieces he moved again and again, as if searching for a pattern that would never fit. "Finish the puzzle," the Snow Queen said softly, her voice like wind moving through glass. "When you find the right shape, the world will make sense." Kai nodded, his eyes distant, his breath shallow in the cold air. Gerda took a step forward. "Kai." Her voice echoed softly in the vast chamber, fragile as the sound of a bell under water. He didn't look up. She ran to him, falling to her knees beside the ice seat, her fingers trembling as she reached for his hand. It was cold, almost weightless. She pressed it between her own, trying to warm it. "It's me," she whispered. "It's Gerda." For a moment, nothing. Then his hand moved slightly as though remembering warmth. The Snow Queen watched, unmoving. Her gaze was not cruel. It was simply still, like the surface of a frozen lake that has forgotten how to ripple. Gerda looked up at her. "Please," she said softly, "he's been gone too long." The Queen tilted her head. "Gone," she murmured. "He is not gone. He is quiet, that is all." Gerda shook her head, tears bright in her eyes. "He isn't meant to be quiet. He's meant to laugh." The Queen's expression didn't change. "Laughter melts things, and melting makes a mess." Gerda smiled through her tears. "Then let it melt." She turned back to Kai, drawing him close. Her tears fell onto his hands, small and bright against the pale of his skin. For a moment, they froze there, perfect pearls of ice. Then, slowly, they began to melt. A single drop slipped down his wrist, and as it did, something deep within him shifted. He blinked. His eyes, so long fixed on the puzzle, filled suddenly with light. "Gerda," he whispered. His voice was faint, like a sound remembered from long ago. I can't see it anymore." the pattern. She smiled, pressing her forehead to his. "It's all right," she said. "You don't have to. Just come home." The Snow Queen rose from her seat. Her movements were as fluid as drifting snow. She stood before them, her expression unreadable. Gerda thought she might be angry, but instead the Queen smiled faintly, a smile thin as moonlight. "Love," she said, almost to herself. "It does not yield to silence, does it?" Gerda shook her head. "No," she said softly. "It listens." The Queen's eyes flickered as though hearing something far away. Then she turned, her gown whispering across the ice. As she walked, the walls began to glow brighter, blue shifting to pale gold. The air warmed, only slightly, but enough to make the frost shimmer like glass touched by dawn. She reached the far door and paused. "Take him," she said. "The snow remembers the way." And then she was gone, dissolving into light, like a sigh the world decided to release. Gerda helped Kai to his feet. He blinked, dazed but smiling. The cold no longer clung to him. Together they stepped out into the open air. The lake gleamed beneath the first breath of sunrise. The snow softened under their boots, and though the world around them was still white and quiet, it no longer felt empty. As they walked hand in hand, the frozen surface began to glow faintly pink, the reflection of a sun that had never truly left, only waited. Behind them, the palace shimmered once more, then faded, its towers melting into mist. In its place, the sky stretched wide and clear, the colour of forgiveness. Gerda turned once, pressing her hand to her heart. She could still feel the warmth there, small, steady, unending. "Come," she said, and together they walked toward home, their footprints filling slowly with light. From flickering candlelight to falling snow, we have drifted together through 5 timeless tales, each one a soft reflection of what it means to be human, to feel, to change, and to rest. We began with the little match girl, her small flame glowing against the dark, a reminder that even in life's coldest moments, love burns on, unseen but eternal. We wandered next with the Ugly Duckling, learning that the gentlest hearts often grow in silence, waiting patiently to recognize their own reflection, and that beauty, real beauty, arrives when we no longer chase it. Then came the Little Mermaid, swimming through the quiet depths of longing, her story a tide between sacrifice and serenity, teaching us that love, even unreturned, can still make the soul shine. We listened beside the Nightingale, whose song taught an emperor and all of us that perfection means little without breath, and that true beauty belongs not to possession but to presence. And finally we walked with Gerda and Kai through the endless hush of the Snow Queen's winter, a long road home to warmth where forgiveness melts even the coldest glass. 5 stories, 5 kinds of love, 5 reminders that tenderness endures in the candle's last spark, in the song of a bird, in the slow thaw of a frozen heart. Now the tales grow still, the lanterns dim, and the night folds around us like a soft blanket. Take one slow breath in and one slow breath out. Let the lessons settle quietly in your heart. That kindness is strength, that warmth can be found even in silence, and that every ending is only another beginning, waiting for morning. Thank you for joining me here at Sleepy Stories. May these gentle tales guide you into dreams of light, love, and rest. Good night and sweet dreams.